And welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm very pleased to welcome Daniel Lowe as today's presenter. Daniel has 12 years experience in ELF and has 5 years experience working with blended learning. So he's the perfect speaker for today's session. Over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you very much, Alistair. So good morning from Honduras. I know it may be the afternoon or evening wherever you are. It's fantastic to have so many corners of the world represented in this webinar. And it's one of the things I really find fascinating about working in the field of EFL is although we're all involved in the same projects, we're all working in such different cultural and geographical locations. So there's just so many different takes on this one experience. So as Alistair was saying, my name is Daniel. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from England, but I've been living in Honduras, in Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, since 2003. So I've actually been out here now for 12 years. The title of today's webinar is Embracing the Benefits of Blended Learning. Here at Moody Tech, we've been using a blended learning approach since 2009. And in that time, we've had many experiences that have helped us to enrich our program. We've also had some few accidents or problems. So the purpose of my presentation today is to share with you many of the successes and the positive outcomes that adopting this approach has had, but also perhaps just to warn you about certain things that you might need to keep in mind so that perhaps you can avoid some of those issues that we encountered along the way. So I thought I should start by maybe saying where am I or where are we here at Moody Tech? Not everybody knows where Honduras is. So here's a little map. Honduras is actually right in the epicenter of the Americas. So this is a little map of Central America. And you can see that Honduras is actually borders 3 countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And it's the only country in that region that actually has a coast with both the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean in such a location that's very good for, commerce and so on. The main income of the country now is actually tourism. You can see on the north coast, just off the north coast, you can just see 3 islands there, which are called the Bay Islands. And if you're looking for an exotic place to go on holiday, I can't recommend this place enough. It actually has the 2nd biggest coral reef in the world, and it's the cheapest place in the world to learn to dive. So if anybody's interested in diving, this is just the best place you could possibly think of going. Okay, a little bit of information about the institution I work for. So Moody Tech is based in Honduras. These are the 2 campuses we have in the 2 major cities of the country, San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa. In fact, the campus in San Pedro Sula has just been, a new campus has just been built. You can see this very attractive sort of garden area with solar panels and lots of vegetation and areas for students to sit and socialize and study. We also have a sister institution, SoTech, which is designed more for working adults. So the schedules of the classes are generally early in the morning and in the evening. And of course, this also has a consequence in terms of our adoption of blended learning, because our working adult students really need to have a more flexible approach. So using online content is a very good way of accommodating students that have other commitments and work schedules. So as you can see, we have 3 campuses for SoTech, one in basically in the same cities, but also in the third city, La Ceiba. So in Unitech and SoTech on a national level, we have over 20,000 students. We're present in 3 cities. We have 5 campuses. We have over 20 undergraduate and 10 postgraduate programs. And we have a commitment to student-centered learning and internationality. So that's a little bit about Unitech and SoTech. These institutions are part of a global network called Laureate International Universities. This is the logo. Laureate International Universities was established in 1999, and our network is comprised of 80 institutions. We're based in 30 nations, and we have over 850,000 students, so it's a huge network. Within the Laureate International Universities exists the Laureate International Universities English program. The English program has formed an alliance with Cambridge University Press, who provide us with quality materials, Bell Training, who provide us with quality assurance and training, and also Cambridge English Language Assessment, who provide us with assessment materials and benchmarking. So our English program exists within the Laureate International University's English program. So let's actually start talking about what is blended learning. Sometimes people get a little bit confused about the term. So this is a very nice definition which Deborah Marsh, the head of digital content for Cambridge, provided me with at a recent presentation at IATEPL. And it says, effective blended learning combines the best elements of face-to-face teaching with the best elements of online instruction to improve student engagement and learning. So I think what we can see from this quote is that we are not trying to replace the face-to-face teaching. In fact, I think what blended learning does is it actually helps us to get more out of our face-to-face teaching. And it also makes students enjoy the face-to-face teaching more. So that has many positive impacts on motivation and also learning outcomes. So let me talk you through the basic 3 phases of implementation. We started back in 2009, and we basically decided to use the Cambridge University Press blended learning product, which is called Touchstone. The reason we chose it was because we felt that it was the best designed and most mature product on the market. So phase 1, we said to our students, here's this fantastic online content which you can use to strengthen and consolidate your understanding of the content that we're looking at this period, but it was entirely optional. And I can tell you that it really wasn't very successful at all. Only a very small number of students were actually using the content, and it really didn't have any perceivable sort of impact on the program. So this is something which you'll probably, if you read literature on blended learning, it often comes up, that making things optional when it comes to online work really isn't a good idea. There does need to be an element of obligation involved. The second step we experimented with was to use the online content as post-class consolidation. So we would tell our students that they had a weekly deadline, let's say on a Sunday night, and that they would have to complete the material that corresponded to the previous week's face-to-face sessions by that weekly deadline. Now, again, this did improve the number of students. I mean, in fact, about 95% of our students were completing the online content at that time. But the problem with weekly deadlines is that students procrastinate, as we all know, and basically allow their work to accumulate, and then they realize that they have to do 5 hours of work in one session. And it really, as we know, as English teachers, there is a maximum amount of work that students should try to do in one session, that its frequency is more important than total amount of time, and particularly when it comes to one session. You know, I think we should probably tell our learners that studying for more than 1.5 hours in one go is probably counterproductive. So by creating weekly deadlines, what we are essentially doing is encouraging our students to leave everything until the last minute, and this very much diminishes the positive impact that online study can have. So the third phase, and the phase that we're currently in, is preparation prior to each face-to-face class. And to be honest with you, this was where we finally saw the real positive fruits of a blended learning approach. By obliging our students to prepare prior to the class, we could therefore the class became much more dynamic, much more practical, and less presentation-based. So basically, this is the model which I would recommend if you are going to apply a blended learning approach. I would say go straight to number 3 in this slide, because really 1 and 2, for different reasons, didn't work for us. And it took us about 3 years to get to stage 3. And at that point, the whole thing started to click into place. Okay, so establishing the rules of the game. This is a very important thing. What is basically the student's online responsibility? So exposure to new language and controlled practice. So we could probably say, like, if you want to think of a class in the traditional PPP model, that the presentation and practice are going to be taking place online. The production and personalization are going to be happening in the face-to-face session. So students are responsible for negotiating meaning and trying to understand the new structures or the new vocabulary that they're being exposed to. And the teacher is responsible for facilitating production opportunities, trying to get students to use the language in a meaningful way, and really just to get them to use the language rather than to study the language. Okay, I'd like to speak about some of the benefits of using digital content for the students. So the first one I think is very important to understand is that obviously digital content is multimedia. So it's very, very rich in visuals. We know as language teachers how important visuals are for conveying meaning. So the classic kind of matching of words with images is very, very much part of any blended learning content. Also, we have audio. A lot of activities are based on the movements of content by the students, so they're manipulating, let's say, unscrambling words, matching. So again, this can be very appealing to kinesthetic learners. Another very good thing about using digital content is that exercises can be repeated as many times as necessary. So if a student attempts an exercise once and clicks on check to gets immediate feedback, doesn't need to wait for the teacher to grade it, but instead will get immediate feedback and will think, oh my God, I got 50% wrong, so let me do that again. And there is no kind of shame when you're working alone at home. You're not worried about anybody kind of looking over your shoulder and noticing but you got half of them wrong. So it's a much less stressful situation for students to work in. As I just mentioned, obviously they're learning through their mistakes, which again is a very, very important concept in language acquisition. Another very useful thing is that it's self-paced and asynchronous. So what we mean by asynchronous is that it doesn't have to happen, it's not as though all students have to be working at the same time. They can find a moment in their day where they're free and they can do the work on their own terms. And also it's self-paced. So whereas in a face-to-face situation, teachers might need to adhere to a lesson plan with time management issues, and a student may feel that they're being hurried along. When a student is interacting with digital content, they can basically do it at their own speed. And finally, and this is extremely important, digital content promotes learner autonomy. So what we mean by this is that students need to take responsibility for their own learning. Rather than depending on the teacher as the font of knowledge, the student has to take on the responsibility of navigating through this new language and trying to figure out using new learning strategies perhaps they haven't used before. I think in many of the countries that I can see that some of the participants are from, perhaps we still have fairly traditional education situations, systems, and students are very much accustomed to having the teacher explain everything. So I think that using digital content can be a very nice way of trying to move them towards a more independent situation. Hopefully that may have an impact on their wider learning styles, not just in the English class, but in future life as well. And finally, it reduces the impact of absences. So we know that in a traditional class, if a student is absent for whatever reason for a couple of classes, they're going to find it quite difficult to catch up. But using digital content allows us to say to the students, well, if you didn't come to class, at least you can study the structures, the vocabulary, and more or less know where we're at for the next class. Okay, so what's in it for us, the teachers? Well, first of all, any LMS or learning management system provides you with management information on student work. So we can see how long a student's been working, how often a student's been working, how many attempts a student needed to complete a activity satisfactorily. So we can, from that information, get a picture of the student's strengths and weaknesses and be able to perhaps tailor exercises in our face-to-face class to help our students. It reduces the grading burden. I remember when I first started teaching, carrying bundles of workbooks back home and grading the same exercise, which seemed such a waste of my time. So having a system which can provide the student with immediate feedback and then provide me with those grades is a fantastic time saver. It also facilitates the redefinition of roles. Very important, as I said earlier, that we're trying to promote learner autonomy. We're also trying to recast the role of the teacher. So the teacher becomes more of a language coach, more of a facilitator, more of somebody who is trying to create a good rapport in the classroom and create a collaboration between the students, and not somebody who is just covering content and tied to a book. It also allows for more skills work. I know a lot of us are very interested in providing our students with more skills, and the Common European Framework of Reference is very much focused on language competency through skills. But some of us feel frustrated because time constraints mean that we really have to cover grammar and vocabulary and content rather than really get into the juicier part of language acquisition. So a lot of my colleagues have expressed their happiness that they're able to work more on skills as a consequence of a blended learning approach. And basically, that means that teachers are happier. A lot of teachers feel that they enjoy their jobs more and that generally they're doing a better job and getting more out of it. So that's certainly another nice outcome for teachers. Okay, now I mentioned the Common European Reference earlier, the Common European Framework of Reference, which, as we know, is a rubric created by the Council of Europe to define language competency at different levels. Here is a table which basically the Association of Language Teachers of Europe created, and it demonstrates the number of guided learning hours that learners generally need to achieve different levels of competency in the Common European Framework of Reference. So guided learning hours, that's an interesting concept. Obviously, guided learning hours are time that students spend with us in the classroom. But what about things they do outside of the classroom? Now, obviously, we can set them, assignments and homework. But what better way to know that they're doing things which are going to be the most productive possible than using this type of scaffolded content, which has been designed by, EFL specialists. So we can really rest assured that what the student is doing outside of the classroom really does fit into this concept of guided learning hours. So that's another aspect of using a blended learning approach, that obviously the content you use, you're in control of, you choose what you use, and that means that you can be much more sort of sure about the quality of what students are doing at home. So what do students think about this? We recently conducted a survey of 2,700 students, and we asked them a lot of questions, and we asked them to rate whether they strongly agree, not sure, disagree, or strongly disagree. So this is one very interesting outcome. So the statement we gave our students to respond to was, I prefer having regular deadlines during the week rather than one weekly deadline. Now, you would imagine that a young person would prefer to have a weekly deadline because it would give them much more flexibility and they could leave things when they wanted to do it. But in fact, look at the results. We had 45% strongly agree and 27% agree. So that means that 82% of our students much prefer having regular deadlines during the week. And I think that one thing that we've learned as part of our experience of blended learning. Now, I have to say that obviously I'm talking about young university freshman type students. Maybe what I'm going to say would not be relevant to more mature adult learners, but certainly with young teenagers, we simply find that they are not able to administrate or organize their time. So they actually appreciate the imposition of structure and deadlines because they recognize that they're actually not able to administrate themselves effectively because of the many distractions of Facebook and other, online sites which they visit. There are so many distractions that they actually need to have an imposed structure. So don't be afraid of establishing, let's say, 3 deadlines during the week. I think we have them on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, because really learners will appreciate that structure. Here's another quote which we asked our students to respond to. I enjoy my face-to-face class more with this new method of working. 47% strongly agree, 38% agree. So there we have an even more categorical response. And why are they enjoying the class more? Well, they're enjoying it more because teachers are no longer shackled to covering content and doing, shall we say, the more boring part of the class, which is generally the language input or presentation, and they can go straight to interactive activities, group work, skills work, generally the kind of things which make a class feel more fun, more dynamic. So this clearly has a very positive impact on student motivation. So again, very, very important thing to realize that the face-to-face class becomes much more a positive experience for the learners in a blended approach. So I've been talking about all the positive things. Now I'm going to reflect on some of the contradictions and problems that can occur. So here's a quote that we gave our students in the survey. I like the teacher to explain everything again in class, even if I have seen the content online. So 67% strongly agree, and 31% agree. 98% want the teacher to continue in the old way. So it's a very kind of counterintuitive thing that we're seeing here, that although learners are saying that they enjoy the face-to-face class more because it's more dynamic, more activity-driven, they're also kind of scared by this new dynamic between the teacher and the learner, and perhaps they're also focusing on their exams, and they're thinking, well, you know, is all this activity in the classroom actually going to help me get a better grade, or do I need to be studying grammar in class? So I think what we're seeing here is that learners are finding this transition still a little bit uncomfortable, and perhaps they're not accustomed yet to the new roles that the teacher and learner should have. And so this doesn't mean to say that we should pander to this kind of insecurity, but I do think that we need to understand that students still feel the need for the teacher to be the explainer. And we need to change that attitude and make them realize that, you know, they can actually function independently, and the teacher doesn't need to constantly be the font of knowledge. So I think this is just a case of continuing to work with our students and to make them reflect on this new approach and understand that they can have a more active role in their own learning. Another interesting contradiction that comes up in our survey, I think it's important to have a hard copy of the textbook in a blended learning approach. So why do we need a textbook in the classroom? That's quite an interesting question. Again, students resoundingly said yes, they do want a textbook. Now, one thing that it's very important for teachers to understand when they're going to adopt a blended learning approach is that basically the content that the publishers create, in this case, the one that we use is Cambridge University Press's Touchstone, is designed very much in the same kind of scaffolded way that a traditional textbook. So usually there's some kind of opening page with the lesson objectives and some pictures which will awaken curiosity, and then there'll be some very basic kind of vocabulary work matching, and then maybe some listening, and it's slowly scaffolded. Now obviously if we replicate that experience in the classroom, then we're basically sending the message to the students that what they did online wasn't really necessary because we're going to do it in class anyway. So to create a needs gap, I think it's very important not to use the textbook perhaps as much as we might normally. Otherwise, we are sending the message that the online study really isn't that necessary. So that kind of asks the question, well, what's the textbook for now? I think that it's still a good idea for the teacher to use the textbook, but very judiciously cherry-picking perhaps activities which are going to help the students further consolidate or maybe expose them to a reading or a listening which is relevant to the topic, but not to follow the full scope of activities. I think it's also important to realize that even though we're dealing with young learners who have been born in a digital world, there still is a desire to have a hard copy or something which they can flick through, perhaps when they're in a situation where there isn't internet available. And in many developing countries, obviously, that is more of an issue. You know, maybe when they're at the university, they have access to Wi-Fi, but when they're on the bus, they don't. So they do need something which facilitates study. I'm going to share with you now, this is a quote from Bell Training, who recently came to Moody Tech to do a quality assurance visit. And I was extremely happy with this quote. The observer said, "I felt that teachers had genuinely been freed up in class time and could devote more time to providing more practice opportunities for students. It was inspiring to see that not a single class was locked into their course books." So this was, for me, a very uplifting thing to read, because it really showed me that, you know, somebody from outside was coming to observe our program and able to see that having students use online content prior to class had a very tangible effect on the teacher's approach to the class as well as the learners. So teachers felt, as it says here, teachers had genuinely been freed up. So sometimes we know that we have this pressure from administrators to cover content. And by delegating that work to the online side of things, it really does free teachers up to focus more on language production and skills. So here are some possible problems. These are problems that we've encountered in the last 5 years. So I'd like to share these with you so that you can do your best to perhaps avoid them. Students getting help. Now, you know, this is something which a lot of people, you know, raise as a concern generally with online education. How do I know that my student actually did the work? Unfortunately, we don't have fingerprint recognition yet, although probably one day we will. So it is actually impossible to know whether student A really did the preparation. But then again, think about more traditional homework that we may have set in the past. How did we really know that the student did that work? I mean, anything that goes on outside of the classroom could have an element of help from somebody else. I think my response to that would be that students need to understand that they won't be able to function successfully in the class unless they come to the classroom with that preparation sort of active in their brain. So getting somebody else to do it would not help them, because they're just not going to be able to meaningfully participate in the activities unless they have a fairly good working knowledge of what the objectives of that class are, what the vocabulary is, you know, an initial understanding of the grammar structures, etc. So making students reflect on the importance of their own understanding rather than just covering the content for the sake of it. zombie clicking. This is a phrase that we have kind of coined here at Moody Tech. And this is the phenomena when students stop really thinking about what they're doing. That's hence zombies, like living dead. And they're just clicking their way through the content. And so if a student makes mistakes, rather than actually thinking about why it's wrong and how they could choose a better answer, they just change the answer and click check again. And through a process of elimination, they get to the correct answer. Now, I think this is perhaps something which the publishers could respond to by making the system a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps, and shuffling the answers every time a student attempts an exercise. So it's a little bit of feedback back to Cambridge and others that are involved in this field. So again, how can we combat zombie clicking? Well, again, it's very important that teachers speak to their students and raise their awareness of the importance of their own learning and being in control of their own learning. So learning to learn. Repetitive formats. You know, any course book soon establishes a format. In the case of Touchstone, each unit is divided into 4 lessons, and each lesson more or less follows the same format. So students sometimes report that they get a little bit tired of the same kind of format, and it becomes a bit predictable. So again, perhaps you know, a little bit of maybe when we get to a level 3 or a level 4, it would be better to try and vary the format a bit to avoid that boredom creeping in. Presentations. Now, although most of the language presentation is done through kind of intuitive guided discovery, so students have to do activities that allow them to prove to themselves that they're understanding what a word means or how a structure works. There are presentations where there are animated teachers basically explaining things in a very traditional way. So again, we've found that often students will simply click through those presentations because there's no kind of game value, there's no points, there's no right or wrong. So again, it's very important to be aware of that and perhaps give students a reason to actually listen to those presentations. So maybe provide them with some comprehension questions that you could provide them to on paper, or you could maybe incorporate on your learning platform. But be aware that those presentations that are contained within the digital online content sometimes are skipped by students unless there are points kind of attached to them. So some recommendations. Give a very substantial induction. It's very important to understand that students really do need to understand what they are going to be doing, how to use the system, what to do in the case of problems. So try and dedicate at least, I would say, 2 face-to-face sessions. If at all possible, take your students to a computer lab if you have one in your institution, and allow them to sort of play around with the system and ask questions in your presence. Evaluate preparation. Now, I know testing sometimes gets a bit of a controversial subject, but we have found that students will do things much more seriously if there is a certain amount of points attached to it. So every deadline, the teacher is verifying the student's completion and success. Now, remember that students are allowed as many attempts as they need to get to a successful situation. It's not like they're under the stress of being tested on the first attempt. They could invest 5 attempts to get to a perfect score. So in that sense, it's not high stress, but it is important to attach some value to the preparation. Establish rules for technical problems. Again, this is very, very important. Students will sometimes hide behind online ghost problems as the reason for not doing something. So they'll say, oh, I couldn't do it because the system wasn't working. And it's very important as teachers that we have a response already thought out to that. One recommendation I would make in this case is to use some kind of capture software. There's one called Jing, J-I-N-G. I'm just going to write it in the chat. It's a free software which basically allows you to record what's happening on your monitor. And you can create a video and then share that with the teacher. So this forces students to actually provide us with evidence of what the problem was. And if they do that, of course, we will say, okay, there was a problem and I'll give you an extension. But it's important to have those rules already established. Incorporate online content in the classroom activities. Now, I mentioned earlier the importance of not just walking through the hard copy of the textbook, because we would be duplicating efforts. But I do think it's important to involve images or certain target language that the students were studying in their online preparation in the classroom. Two reasons. One, it shows that the teacher is actually aware of what the students are doing online. And secondly, it creates a link between what the students were seeing and what they're doing in class, and therefore gives them more of a sense that it's important to do the online because it will actually help them recognize and understand and navigate their way through the activities that the teacher has designed for the classroom time. Okay, what about moving forward? We've been working now with Touchstone for 5 years, and here are certain things that I think are coming or need to come. So first of all, adaptive learning. Don't know how many of you know about this. This is basically the concept that we can design content which adapts itself to the learner. So if a learner is getting every question or item correct, then rather than just continuing at that level, the computer will increase the level of difficulty. And likewise, if a student is constantly failing with an activity or an item set, the digital content will then lower its level of difficulty. So much more tailor-made to the learner, and that will prevent frustration. Frustration in the sense of a strong learner having to trawl through activities that they don't really need to do, or a weak learner who perhaps is feeling frustrated by his lack of success. Teacher resource book. I mean, we all know about the teacher's edition, but what I think really would be useful for teachers in a blended learning approach is a handbook or a resource book which basically proposes activities that the teacher could do in the face-to-face session that would help extend and consolidate the preparation the student had done online. So rather than using the course book, which, as I say, is a kind of duplication of the scaffolded content online, we would have a whole bunch of activities that would be more practical and interactive. More emphasis on learning to learn skills. I think a lot of teachers are just opening their eyes to the importance of actually facilitating students learning about their own learning habits and how they can become more successful with that. So perhaps with blended learning, the imperative is even stronger. And this one is something I think is very interesting, providing teachers with authoring tools. So this would allow us to create our own, drag and drop, unscramble, matching, And perhaps we would be able to use references to local situations that would perhaps make the content seem more relevant and meaningful to our students. So allowing the teacher to actually author content and to dovetail it in with the content that the publishers created, I think would be a fantastic improvement to the product. And one other thing which I think would be very useful for us as teachers would be teacher alerts. So rather than having to trawl through management information, it would be great if the system could send us a message saying, okay, Mario has actually tried to do this activity 5 times, and on each occasion he's failing. So rather than us having to drill down through the information and locate these problems, the system could give us the heads up, that would be even better. So that's the end of my presentation. I think I've pretty much stayed within the 45 minutes that I was asked to speak for. Thank you very much for your attention. I know there's a lot of information that I've kind of given in this presentation, and I'm sure there are some questions. So if anyone would like to ask, I'd be happy to give my response to any queries you may have.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel. We're perfect timekeeping, absolutely. And yes, we've got some questions already coming in. So some of which you've answered since they were asked. But let's start with a question from Jocelyn Castanos, who asks about issues of cheating in the online environment, whether you've got any particular recommendations on dealing with that.
Well, I mean, there are actually exams and tests which form part of the content of the Touchstone product, and those are very much, like the traditional, end of unit quiz or end of partial exam. And yes, I mean, I would very much hesitate to allow my students to do those type of evaluations outside of a controlled environment. So those type of evaluations, I think, have to be done in a computer lab. But in terms of the type of online work that I've really been talking about today, which is a preparation for face-to-face class, I think it really goes back to the teacher being very much, monitoring the student's performance in the class. And if there's a disconnect between the student's performance in class and the supposed, information about what they did online, we really need to confront the student and in a nice way, obviously, the first time and say, according to the system, you've done 100% of the preparation, but according to what I see in the classroom, it doesn't really seem to be happening. Why is that? And 9 times out of 10, a student will acknowledge that somebody helped them and feel a little bit ashamed and generally not do it again. So it's very important for teachers to make it clear to students that they are responsible for their own preparation, and that the teacher is designing classes which assume that preparation has been meaningfully done by each of the students. So it's really, making the students more responsible for their own learning and outcomes.
Okay, thanks. Got a connected question that ties in particularly with this question of giving students or letting students take on more responsibility. Sylvia Dillon asks, if someone who hasn't done the homework is starting to get lost, how can we help them catch up without, I guess, actually making it unnecessary for them to do the work?
Yeah, so it's a great point, actually. I mean, we do need to stress to learners that this is really not negotiable. I mean, this is something that has to be established in the learners' minds through the induction process, where we need to communicate to learners that the teachers are very much designing classes which assume that the preparation has been done. Now, if the student, for whatever reason, has not been able to do it, one strategy that my colleagues often use is to place them as a kind of observer and ask the other classmates to kind of explain what they learned online and what they're doing in the activity. So that can actually be quite a nice opportunity to promote sort of learner collaboration, where somebody is not depending on the teacher bringing them back up to scratch, but actually on fellow classmates.
Okay, thanks. Interesting question here from Isabel Gonzalez Bueno, who asks, what are the implications of a blended learning approach like this for teacher training?
Right, yeah, that's very interesting. And I mean, definitely the new kind of definitions of the role of the teacher can be quite destabilizing for many teachers. You know, rethinking the traditional lesson PPP lesson plan and suddenly having this being freed up and having much more time to dedicate to skills. We found that teachers have been very appreciative of, you know, training sessions on skills, how to teach skills, and how to maybe, you know, be more ambitious with your skills work. So yes, I think that we do need to understand that the fact that the teachers suddenly have more time, some teachers do need help in terms of how to best use that time.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Fakhruddin Brahmi, who asks, can we rely on technology to assess speaking skills? And if so, I mean, how do we do that?
My answer to that is no, we can't. I mean, basic speaking skills, you know, like pronunciation and perhaps intonation, can perhaps be developed by students listening to recordings and then recording their own voice and then comparing the two, which is one of the tools that Touchstone offers. It's called Voice Tools. But, you know, the other much more kind of humanistic aspects of speaking, like fluency, coherency, range, those are really things which I believe are really only possible to achieve in a human interaction situation. So, you know, this is an interesting question, isn't it? So we can actually begin to divide what things can be done best online and what things need to have a teacher. So what are the inherent human aspects of language acquisition, and what are the perhaps more technical things that can be done online? So I think it's a very interesting moment in sort of EFL evolution, where we're forced to kind of consider what are the human aspects which a teacher must look after, and what other things can be delegated to a digital environment.
Okay, thanks. I've got a couple of questions around preparing your own content, Daniel. Do you just use the Touchstone content for the online materials, or do you create any of your own materials?
We're just, I mean, you know, we're achieving a level of digital maturity now, which I think has given us the self-confidence to just to start to put our feet into the water. So, in fact, our goal is to create some material ourselves by July, and the idea is to perhaps include, you know, certain references I mentioned earlier to local realities, so that, you know, obviously Touchstone is a kind of global product and it makes references to different cultures and geographic places. But I do think that if we can make, you know, some of the content the students interact with more locally recognizable, then that can have a positive effect on learner motivation and so on. So we will be authoring our own digital content shortly. So yes, that's something we're getting into now.
Thank you. Thank you. A question now from Katie Faduli, who asks, at what age level can we start using blended learning with our students?
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved at university level, but I mean, you know, my nephews who are 6 and 4 are extremely, you know, they love their tablets, and my brother has, you know, downloaded lots of educational apps. So it's not a field I'm involved with, but I definitely think that you know, young learners could very usefully use digital content as a part of their language acquisition journey.
Okay, thank you. Question from Mary Ward, which you may have covered earlier, but Mary asks, what percentage of students' online work makes up their final evaluation?
Okay, in terms of like here at Moody Tech, the actual preparation online is actually a very small part of their score. It's only 10%. But then what we do is we also have 10% for what we call classroom participation. So what we're doing there is we are assessing the students' performance based on the preparation they did. So as I mentioned earlier, that's a way of combating this temptation that some learners may have to either get somebody else to do it or just to mindlessly click through the content. Because when they know that their performance in the classroom is going to be under a certain amount of scrutiny, there's an added reason to sort of pay attention and do the preparation properly. So overall, 20%, 10% for the actual preparation and 10% for what they're able to do with that preparation.
Thank you. Question now from Sergei Juan Gomez, who asks, do students, you feel, need some print? Do they need a textbook or just a set of photocopies for studying to go with the online materials? Or do you think they can learn purely with the online materials and no print?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, you know, why do we need a book where we're only going to really use, perhaps, I mentioned earlier this concept of, you know, cherry picking perhaps one activity from the textbook. I think that, you know, the textbook, as blended learning becomes more widespread, it is going to need to change, and it's going to become more of an explicit, perhaps, reference tool. So, you know, if a student is wanting to prepare for an exam or something, and they just want to have an overview of a language structure, that there would be like a traditional sort of review pages, and then perhaps the kind of pages that or photocopiable things that students might need for, you know, kind of information gap activities that teachers could conduct in the classroom. But yeah, I think the traditional course book is going to increasingly become redundant. But as I said before, students do want something in their hands. They still feel the need for that sort of security blanket.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to turn my colleague Simon's microphone on now, because Simon's got one question he'd like to ask you, Daniel.
Okay.
You can hear me. I'm just wondering if you could sort of summarize, because we're coming to the end of the time now. Have you had any positive experiences from blended learning? And if so, what was your kind of most positive experience in terms of maybe either teacher experience or you know, more positively learner experience from doing blended learning?
Right. I mean, I think, you know, the central success of this is, you know, in the quote that I used earlier, freeing teachers up and allowing teachers more time to actually focus on the more interesting and human parts of language acquisition. You know, interaction and helping students consolidate and actually use the language rather than, you know, wasting half the time on sort of presentation. And so teachers genuinely report that they enjoy their job more as a consequence because they're doing more interesting things. And then with the learners, again, our survey has shown resoundingly that although sometimes there are complaints that the internet connection's slow or it's a lot of work, it isn't really a lot of work. I mean, our students are working 3 to 4 hours a week online, and depending on the institution here at Moody Tech, they're doing between 4.5 and 6 hours of face-to-face. But just, they are reporting that they enjoy the class more. So, I think all of us want to have motivated learners who look forward to coming to class. So anything that we can do to make that happen is clearly a good thing.
Great. Thank you very much, Daniel. That's been an absolutely fascinating session with lots of really interested questions. Everyone really enjoyed that. Lots of discussion. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but we'll be back in a week's time on June the 10th when Chris Redston will be giving the final talk in his series of 6, this time on helping students with pronunciation. So I do hope you'll be able to join us for that. You can find a link for that on our news section of our website or on our Facebook page as well. And also, we'll be putting out information very soon about another webinar we've got coming up from Deirdre Safers on June the 24th, which is on engaging students in online activities. We should have that up on the website available to sign up for in the next few days. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks in particular to you, Daniel. It was a very interesting session. And I hope we can have you back to join us again at some point in the future. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.